Hey, it's Karina Reichman, and you are listening to Comes a Time with Oteil Burbridge and Mike Fenoya. If you're digging the podcast, do these guys a favor and review and subscribe. It means a lot. Be sure to follow the pod on social media, YouTube, and if you're joining for bonus episodes and exclusive content, go to patreon.com/comesatimepod and get on the bus. And now, here's Mike and Oteil.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Comes a Time podcast. That is my friend Oteil.
And that is my buddy Mike. Back together again.
Too long.
Ebony. I hate that song. I shouldn't even done that.
It's black. It's white. It's yeah.
But we've been doing these, like, I've done a couple solo podcasts because you've been so busy with your special, which, by the way, is crushing.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you. I appreciate it. Don't let me down. It's out there, guys. If you haven't listened, go to youtube.com/Mike Fenoya, MikeFinoia. Thanks, Oteil. And thank you for sharing it.
Hell yeah, dude.
Man, I'm kind of blown away by the response and all that. It's really awesome. And what's cool is that people are in the comments quoting jokes that are deep into the special, which means they're watching it. They're sticking around. They're not clicking and going, I'm done, and then moving on. So I'm happy about that.
You should be, man. But we'll get to talk about that on our next solo podcast, just you and me. But by the way. Yeah,
that I can't wait to talk. Yeah, we gotta. Yeah, but today's no slouch either, though, huh?
No, today we had one of my who knew, but John Amos, who among many things, depending on what era you're of what year you were born. I was born in 1964, so I remember John as James Evans, the father on Good Times, the Norman Lear nightly television show. Black America's Dad, the first America's Dad for Black people. And then also the smash hit miniseries called Roots, which detailed, an African's journey from Africa to here and that whole story. But he also, most people that are younger would probably remember him in Coming to America,
And also, I mean, that and Good Times. I mean, just that show, I grew up watching it, and
it's
just
ubiquitous,
I mean, it's just, that was seriously like, as we were talking about it, I was thinking, because I watched a lot of TV with my grandparents and, when like Nick at Night and all that, I always gravitated towards like that kind of 70s, Odd Couple, Taxi, All in the Family, Good Times, Jeffersons, Sanford and Son. I loved Sanford and Son was quite possibly one of my favorite shows of all time. Red Fox is just
come on.
You big dummy. I love him. But I mean, there's a couple of dads, TV dads, like we spoke about,
he's the one.
Yeah, him. Wait, you want what's interesting? I think I mentioned this to you on the phone when we were talking about this. Him and Dan Laria, who was the dad in The Wonder Years, were two dads that I really, really loved. Both football players.
Interesting.
Dan played at Southern Connecticut, and they both were football playing, dudes that went into acting and played dads that are pivotal in my like TV watching. As like, these are really cool. Tough guy though, these weren't
gentle. Yeah.
Yes, vulnerable.
And in John Amos's case, which is what's so great about him, because he is that guy that he played for real. And we always suspected that he was. And now at 59 years of age, I've verified, he is that guy.
Yeah.
Super intimidating, like physically, even at, he's like 82, 3, 4 something now. But still, when you shake his hand, you're shaking a grown ass man's hand.
Totally. You're like, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, exactly. It's immediately like, yes, sir.
A grown ass man. I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? That football player hand. But
yeah.
it's also, he's super gentle, super fair, clear. It's super clear he's not going to take any shit from anyone. Right?
Yeah.
Like, period. Like, you know this just from a look.
Yeah.
But he's also so gentle and so vulnerable.
Yeah.
And the career he's had, I mean, Mary Tyler Moore, Dick Van Dyke, James Earl Jones, Sidney Poitier. Then you fast forward, Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Willis, Eddie Murphy. It goes on. You go into this guy's IMDb, which I believe is International Movie Database.
Or
Internet.
That's IMDb is
IMDb
database. Yeah.
Not sure what the I is, but it's movie. How many movies you done?
I think it's Internet Movie Database. Yeah.
Internet Movie. I mean,
think
you just start at the 60s and every decade.
No, he's omnipotent.
Working. Yeah, it's incredible. And he has one of those voices that it's great to the James Earl Jones, Morgan Freeman. He's in that like Mount Rushmore of TV voices,
You know what he reminds me of kind of in a way is Ken Kesey, in the way that he was like, Kesey was a barrel-chested wrestler, a physical, tough guy, just a
thinker.
But he also believed that communicating with animals when you wear a mask, you know what I mean? Like there's a wonder and a beauty and I am fascinated by that. I'll tell you, that's one of the things that drew me to Kerouac originally was he got a ride to Columbia playing football. And then he writes these like romantic beatnik literature. Like he changes the world with his literature about being spilling his guts to a beautiful woman at a train station or whatever. And it's just like, that's not your normal athlete, Yeah,
it's not dumb jock.
Right. And it's like, there's these vulnerable kind of, it's the thing I love about Ricky. It's the thing I love about John Amos. Yeah. Just tough. Yeah. But also like self-aware,
Mm-hmm.
And bucks the trends and stuff. So no, this was like talking to I think you had said it years ago. It's like we have these like living exhibits, like these living museums,
living history books.
Yes. And it's just wild to be able to kind of like, he was there at the beginning of TV, It's really fascinating. It was still
the Wild West of TV. And really great conversation. You guys are going to love it. It was, I feel like my whole life these days is an episode of, did somebody dose me? Or on the other side of the coin, who needs acid? It's so crazy, I don't even need it.
Yeah. I know. We're going to turn off the computers and go talk to our wives and go, yeah, we just had a talk with John Amos.
He's telling us about how he's a huge deadhead now.
Yeah, Fire on the Mountain's his favorite song. All right.
Enjoy, folks.
Right. Yeah. If you guys are having fun, rate and review and share and join us on patreon.com/comesatimepod. And, Teal, I've been drinking out of my Comes a Time mug. There it is in focus. We got some merch, guys. You can find it on our, go to our socials, Comes a Time Pod, and you'll find your way there. And
they make great holiday gifts.
They sure do.
No matter what holiday you're celebrating.
Yes. Flag Day or Christmas or Easter or
Hanukkah
or the days between or Hanukkah.
Diwali. Diwali just passed.
Diwali did just pass.
But we could still get that late Diwali present.
Belated Diwali present. That's right. You totally can. Yeah. And please check out Oteil's amazing album on his YouTube channel, right? It's there that people can find it there.
And on Spotify and all the Apple Music, wherever.
This stuff matters, guys. Your clicks and your likes and your shares and all that. We all are working for this omnipotent robot lord named Algorithm, and he likes little snacks. At
least he's got rhythm.
Yeah, Algorithm. Maybe you say it like that. It's not so shitty. Algorithm. Thank you, guys. We love you. Enjoy John Amos. How cool is this?
Yeah, we usually do our intros afterwards. So, and it's just loose. We are
Conversation.
It's not really an interview. It's more of a conversation. But for me, I want to find out most what matters to you the most. We could talk about your history and all that, but I'm more interested in what matters to you the most, especially now after such a long career and stuff. But thanks for coming on. Thanks for making some time for us, man.
Thanks for allowing me to participate.
God, it's truly an honor.
Yeah, and needless to say, in the band, we were completely surprised that you were a fan. When I think you might have liked something or said something on one of my posts on Instagram. I was like, "What? Is this the real guy?" And then I saw KC, and I was like, and then fast forward to later when you come out to the concert, man, you helped everybody's vibe that night just with your presence and being so friendly to everyone. Are you there?
I'm here.
All right. He said you didn't ask me a question.
Well, I'd like to ask a question. As a Chiefs fan, how do you feel about all of the Taylor Swift stuff? Is it a distraction?
No, it doesn't bother me because I think ultimately they're going to start to play football and concentrate on that exclusively. That's when the real Chiefs will come out.
Thank you. Yep. I'm a Miami Dolphin fan, and I'd like to congratulate you on that win in Germany. I think it's strange that they send NFL over to Germany to play. I think it puts a weird kink in all of our seasons and all of our progress, but that's just my opinion.
I got you. Well, it's a global game now, so it's cool that they're playing in Germany, I think.
I think so too. I just wish they stayed for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe give them a little bit of time to settle and then travel back. But yeah, you guys have a great team this year. Taylor Swift or no Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Well, how was it that you did come to acting? Because I know originally you wanted to be a football player, right? And got some time on the Chiefs
too. But ironically enough, it was in the pursuit of a football career that I discovered my real talent, and it was confirmed for writing. Because when Hank Stram released me from the Chiefs the second time, he allowed me to read something that I had written, and it was all about my trials and tribulations in an attempt to become a professional football player, called The Turk. And when I read it, the entire team responded in such a way that it let me know that I had a possible career as a writer. And I then began to pursue that 100%, leading to a career writing, starting with writing for television on a local basis, and then ultimately writing for network television shows, and then writing my own projects. And that's when Casey and I began to really collaborate. He is a filmmaker and me as a writer. So we had it all going on.
Wow.
That's amazing. So who got you started? Did you have any like writing mentors when you were like going to take this left from football into writing?
Well, the beautiful thing about television in those days, it was an emerging medium. So I emulated those writers whose programs I loved, like shows with that ensemble of wonderful writing performers like Sid Caesar, Imogene Coker, and Art Carney, and all the rest of those guys and ladies that went on to become legends in the industry. And those were my favorite programs, the variety programs with those people and others. So I became a big fan of commercial television and all the writing that went on. I studied it. I studied it really, really diligently. And I found it was very, very gratifying to be able to come up with stuff that in some cases they could use. And I auditioned my material and ultimately got hired as a writer for a local television show. And that led to my building my confidence with a couple of radio personalities who were given Loman and Barkley were a couple of local radio personalities whose marketplace ran from Santa Barbara, California, down to San Diego. And they gave me an opportunity to become one of the writers on their television program. And the other writers that were just getting started at that time went on to become luminaries in their own right, like Craig T. Nelson, Barry Levinson, an Academy Award winner. Barry was. And we all got started on a local basis. So it was a wonderful time. Television was just emerging and there were no rules. So if you had the confidence and the brashness, which I did, to apply for those jobs as writers for television, is a wonderful opportunity to learn and to grow with an industry that was just beginning to emerge. Everybody had television sets at that time.
Yeah.
But the medium hadn't begun to develop itself in terms of opportunities and its offerings.
That's great that comedy was kind of the thing that got you going first. The comedy writers, because Mike does stand up, and I heard you were
show as well.
Yeah, I heard you were hanging out at the comedy clubs.
I sure was. A lot of the clubs were just getting started then, and the first club I ever worked at as a stand-up was a club called It. That was the name of the club. The comedy store was named It.
Yeah.
Some other guys were just getting started at that time, working at different places where Richard Pryor, amongst them.
Yeah.
So we were all really getting started at that time. Our careers were just beginning to take off. None of us knew exactly what we were doing other than the fact we wanted to make people laugh. So it worked out all right. I came along at the right time.
Yes, you did. How was it? Oh, I'm sorry, Oteil. Go ahead.
You go ahead. You go
ahead. I was gonna ask just because it interests me that you read a piece that you wrote in front of your the players. What was that like for you? Was that a moment of anxiety or fear or excitement, a little bit of everything?
I felt very, very comfortable because I had read the material to a couple of guys earlier, and they cracked up and they got reflective in all the right moments. So I knew I had something, but it wasn't until Amsterdam gave me a chance to read it before the entire team, and their response was so uniform that I knew that confirmed my ability to write and my ability to reach an audience that I had decided to focus on.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful feeling to find the niche.
Confirmation of ability. I think that's a really neat thing to think about, because we have that thing and we go, do I have it? Is it just me that thinks this? And then when your peers go, that was funny, or that was poignant, or like you said, at the right moments, they got reflective. That's a really important moment in a creator's life.
Believe it.
Yeah. That's everything from professional wrestling to music, when you can connect with the audience.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's on a small scale or a big scale.
Yeah.
I
like that confirmation of ability. That's big.
So when did you feel like you were first starting to make some headway as an actor? How did you go from writing to acting and wanting to perform more?
Well, I always loved the live medium. So while television didn't offer me the same opportunities, you could always find stage work if you're willing to work for literally nothing in a lot of cases, and just for the experience in so many other cases. So the opportunities were there if you were willing to put in the time to learn your craft. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to learn how to become a proficient and reliable stage actor, because I felt if I could present myself live to an audience, I could work anytime, anywhere. And all I needed was me and a place where the audience could be comfortable, and it made no difference to me how small the audience was or how large. I had the confidence that I could make any group of people laugh in the right places, and I could tell stories. I always regarded myself more as a storyteller than as an actor, and feeling that way kept my ego intact, because there were always stories to tell.
Were there any particular actors or either stage or television or in movies that you looked to in those early days to emulate or to look up to?
There were quite a few, and if I were to look back and say, were any of them people that I was to work with later, definitely. People like Ernest Borgnine. I remember seeing him on a cover of Life magazine, and they billed him as Hollywood's ugliest man.
Yeah.
He's a classic, good-looking guy, but he had a wonderful gift of acting and spontaneous repertoire. He could make any group of people laugh,
Yeah.
or become reflective. Ernest was a gifted actor.
I have a. Oh, I'm so sorry. My fault. Go ahead.
Quite all right. I was just going to say I got to work with him a number of times, and it was when I got to do a television series with him, in which I played a police officer and he played a uniformed police officer. And both of us were in a squad car, and unbeknownst to me, the third member of our law enforcement team was a robot. And that made for some good laughs and good writing as well.
What was the name of that show? I gotta.
Cleveland Haven, I believe it was. The names of our two characters as police officers. And I remember being in the locker room and realizing that I was working with Ernest Borgnine. And when it dawned on me who I was working with and the things that he had already accomplished as an actor, I froze. Initially, I wasn't intimidated at all by his success, but when he really registered for me was right in the middle of the shoot. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm working with Ernest Borgnine. I couldn't believe it. And it came my turn to do my lines. Not a word came out. My jaw froze, my mind froze. I said, my goodness, I'm working with Ernest Borgnine. And the thought of it was so startling to me that my machinery shut down.
I love
that's how much I respected him. And we had a project called Future Cop that we worked on together, in which, like I said, we were both policemen. In Haven was the name of the project, but later it became Future Cop. And was sort of a forerunner of today's science fiction, in which are really automatons and robots. So we were ahead of our time, but he was wonderful to work with. He had a natural gift as a storyteller himself and as an actor. And he was very generous in that he showed me and taught me without sitting me down and saying, this is the way you do this. He showed me by example the discipline that was required. You had to study and you had to know your lines. That way you had the confidence to freeform when it came time to, and the opportunity presented itself to freeform. So I learned from some of the best as I was coming up. As I said, I couldn't have picked a better time to try and emerge or immerse myself in the industry and to learn from those that were also learning as the medium began to develop itself. My timing couldn't have been better.
It's so interesting. And just to show you how small of a world it is, and I apologize for interrupting, but that kind of blew my mind. My great-grandfather's, one of his best friends was Ernest Borgnine. They served together in the armed services, and Ernest was from Connecticut as well, and he came to my great-grandfather's house, and I got to meet him when I was a little kid, and it was really incredible. He'd come to the house a couple times, and he was always very, very nice, a very nice man. So he holds a special place in my heart because he's friends with my great-grandfather. So it's really neat to hear you say that. I just got chills. And I was lucky enough to have my great-grandfather around until he was 100. So
you were blessed. You were blessed.
really, really neat. So just so wild to hear you say that. He was always the ugliest man in show. How funny. Because I see him as kind of like such a bright memory,
Me too. So many movies. Like, I know we're dating ourselves, but you say Ernest Borgnine, it's just like,
I know.
So many movies come to mind. He was such a big part of my childhood.
Well, mine as well. And even when I got older and I began to study films, some of my favorite films were westerns, and of course he played in that classic directed by Sam Peckinpah, The Wild Bunch, in which he was one of the Wild Bunch. He, along with Warren Woods and Bill Holden and a few other luminaries that became legendary themselves. But that was a great western as far as I was concerned. I must have memorized the dialogue because I saw it no less than a half a dozen times.
That's great. It's great to hear that the directors were letting you guys improv. Do you find that some directors are okay with it and some aren't, or that it just, if the director trusts the actor more, if it's a better actor, then they're allowed to go off and improv beyond what's written on the page?
Our freedom there was a direct correlation between our freedom and the amount of trust that the director had in us and we in him. So to work with Ernest let me know that. But the main thing about working with him was his preparation. He looked like he was ad-libbing. He was so comfortable in his delivery that you'd think he was making it up on the spot, but it was just the end result of having rehearsed it and rehearsed it and rehearsed it. His preparation was everything, and that taught me a life lesson for the industry. Be prepared. You never know when the opportunity was going to present itself. And I did nothing but learn when I worked with him. It was a learning experience.
Wow.
Yeah, I've heard that expression. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, that is very true. I like that. People may not know what a passion you have for music. I certainly didn't realize, and then when we got to meet and hang out, and I'm sure fans of Comes a Time have already seen the videos of you on the rail singing at the O'Teal and Friends show, which was such a kick for us. The band played better that night because of it. There's no question about it. But then when we got to talk to you for a minute, me and Jason, I think Lamar, and you brought up Noel Pointer.
Yes.
As a violinist that I was so into as a teenager, because you wouldn't normally see like a violinist at all improvising, and a young black guy that could clearly play classical, but was also improvising and doing that was a mind blower. So when you brought that name up, I was just like, whoa, but you were more than a fan. You collaborated with him, right?
Yes, I did. I was at home one night in New Jersey long before I met him, and I was listening to Symphony Sid, who was a radio personality who played jazz, and he'd usually try and do a show or two from his favorite club. At that time, he was broadcasting from a club called Fat Tuesdays in New York. I was living in Jersey, so I turned the radio on, and there he is, Symphony Sid, jumping with my boy Sid in the city. So it was cool. You see, the thing about your musical education in those days, you could hear some of the best musicians on the planet playing in New York City, which was obviously in close proximity to where I lived in Jersey. So when I heard Noah Pointer play, I became so inspired that I knew I had to meet him. And I had my pajamas on. I was getting ready to go to sleep. And he started playing a piece called Roots Suite. And of course, I'd already participated in Roots, the program. So I immediately jumped into my clothes, right over my pajamas, jumped in my car and drove to New York City because he was at Fat Tuesdays in New York. And that was only about a 30-minute drive from my home in South Orange, New Jersey at that time. And I went over and I went into the club and I asked the club manager, I said, can I speak with Billy Pointer? Billy was the lead musician for Noel's musical ensemble, and he said, and he was Billy, was of course was Noel's brother, his big brother, and I mean a big brother. And so Billy asked me, he said, "Well, what is it you want to do?" And I said, "I just like to improvise with Noel. If he could play Roots Sweet again." I'd heard him play it earlier that evening on the radio, and he said, "Well, let me ask Noel." And he went over, and Noel was in the middle of his second performance for the evening, and he agreed immediately. And so I went on, and I just went up and I improvised. I had no idea what I was going to do, except I knew I had a story to tell, and it fit in with the music that he had already played earlier called Roots Sweet. So I began to tell a story as I saw it that went with the music, and it worked out fine. And on the basis of that, we both mutually expressed a desire to collaborate further. So we wrote a show together called An Evening with John Amos and Noel Pointer. And he was such a gifted musician. And that was the thing in those days. We worked more by inspiration than by hopes of acquiring any vast fortune or having a career. And if it felt good to us, we did it. And we didn't care where or what the venue was or what the audience was. The music, like I said, the industry was emerging at that time. So we were free form artists. And there was a great feeling of freedom in those days. So we were pretty successful. We toured for the better part of a year and a half. And we played all over the United States. And audiences loved what we did. Sometimes they had no idea what it was we were doing. Because we would work off on the fly. Whatever inspired us to play or to do, we went ahead and went for it. And
Nice.
very often it worked. A few times that it didn't work, we learned from it. So it was a wonderful time to experiment. And he being such a gifted musician, playing the piano as well as the violin, and I mean, playing it to the degree that at the age of 14 or 15, he was playing with world-class symphonies, and both here and abroad. He was a genius, in fact. And as things would happen in our respective lives or that were newsworthy, like Ronald B. McNair, the black astronaut who perished in the spacecraft. I was on a plane coming back from New York, flying to California, and about 3 a.m. on the plane, I got the inspiration for a piece we later were to call McNair, which was a tribute that I'd written to Ronald B. McNair. And I called Noel. Of course, I woke him up. It was about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning in Brooklyn. But I woke him up and I said, "Noel, I've got something." And he said, "Okay, wait a minute, let me get up." And he got up, woke himself up to some degree, went to the piano, and it started playing along with whatever I transcribed or whatever I dictated to him.
Wow.
And on the strength of that spontaneous creativity, we wrote a piece called McNair, which we later performed with some of the lead audiences, or rather the lead ensembles from various institutions, musical institutions and aggregations that you can imagine at that time. But it was a wonderful time for creativity. And to work with Noel Pointer was so gratifying and so confidence inspiring that I'll look back on that as one of the highlights of my life and my career, to work with Noel Pointer.
Wow.
That's great.
I love that. You had the pajamas on, you were ready for bed, and then you heard it and you're like, nope, no going to bed. It's time to
30-minute drive too.
Time to go make this happen. Yeah. Yeah.
Inspiration. You got to act on the inspiration when it really happens, folks. You know, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's still, I try not to fanboy and stuff, but when I heard you say my name, when we were hanging out at the Cap Theater and stuff, it was such a weird thing. It's kind of like Ernest Borgnine when you think you're fine, and then because you have one of those distinctive voices, like in television, like James Earl Jones, Morgan Freeman. They're just these classic. A lot of people might not know. I know you do, John, but remember Roscoe Lee Brown?
Absolutely. I had the chance to work with him in a Disney film called The World's Greatest Athlete, in which he played an African witch doctor and I played a football coach.
That's right. Oh my God. Yeah.
His voice is one of the quintessential, just American voices, but definitely if you're Black, like the Roscoe Lee, I mean, and you have one of those voices. So it freaks me out when I hear you say my name. It's just like, wait a minute. It's like, someone must feel like if John Wayne says their name or something, I don't know. Or it's just like,
I understand. And I feel nothing but gratitude when you mention it in that vein. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm sure that you had, I wanted to ask you about, when you had the opportunity to work with some people, like, for example, maybe I would imagine Sidney Poitier was a big hero.
No doubt. Absolutely no doubt.
And who were some people that you got to meet where you were like, oh, wow, that, that were just, I'm sure there's many. I know Ernest Borgnine also, but.
Oh, there were so many that you name the luminary and chances are I got to work with he or she earlier on in my career.
Yeah, it seems like it was quite a small world then, huh?
Yes, it was a much smaller world and a very educational.
Yeah.
If you were willing to learn, the opportunities to work with those people afforded you an education that you could not have received otherwise. It was an incredible time to learn the industry and to learn who your real peers were. And it was very gratifying to know that you had worked with some of these people, but you had learned from all of them. In some cases, the right thing to do. In other cases, the thing that you would do again if you had the opportunity.
Yeah. That's massive. Yeah.
So they were more accessible back then. It makes sense. They probably weren't as famous, as legendary as we are now back in the. Although some of them, Sidney probably was already legendary way back then. But did you get a chance to work with Sidney?
Yes, I did. I did a couple of films in which Sidney was the star, and but he was such a luminary that none of us even dreamed or had enough courage or were naive enough to think we would ever work with an actor of his caliber. But he was the entertainment industry as far as African Americans were concerned. He was the man. There was no other actor that we knew of that had reached his heights in terms of their popularity worldwide. He was one of a kind. So I'm grateful for the opportunities that I had to work with him and just to be in his presence. To work in a project with Sidney Poitier, that meant that you had arrived at a certain point in your own respective career. So it was a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful time for me to look around and say, my goodness, I'm working on a film with Sidney Poitier. And that's when you knew that you had finally arrived. You could say you had a career. Working with Sidney Poitier in a movie, that was as good as it got. None of us dreamed that we would ever do better than that or reach those heights, in fact.
And how old were you if you remember, when you did that film with him?
You see, how old was I?
Yeah. Do you remember how old you were then?
I can't
Roughly.
my exact age, but suffice it to say that I had started in the business and I was getting some momentum going. So I guess I'd be in my very early 40s, late 30s, somewhere.
Yeah. That's great.
I have something I've been dying to ask you since I knew that we were going to be chatting with you, and I mentioned this to Oteil. I'm always fascinated by the role of a father in plays, in movies, in television shows, and I as someone who grew up watching you as a father on Good Times, I just want to say I think it was some people see father figures on the screen, and you kind of get an idea of like this is like what a man is and could be and things like that. And I feel like you did such an incredible job as a father figure on that show, and literally and figuratively. But my question is this: when you're playing a father, or when you're, number one, were you a father at that time? And if not, or if so, how did that relate to the way that you played the character? And did you realize the importance of what you were representing to the folks that were watching the show?
Well, yes, I was a father at that time. My daughter was born, Shannon. My first child was born, and so she was a very precocious child. She loved to read. She loved to be involved in the arts, and she was somewhat of an extrovert herself. So it all worked out fine. She enjoyed what I was doing, and I was able to teach her as I progressed in my career. She was able to observe and emulate me in some respects, though she chose not to become an actress. She was more of the production type person, but she could recognize and appreciate talent when she was around it at an early age.
Wow.
And so I knew the responsibility I had in portraying television's first Black father. And it was an awesome responsibility because no matter what your choices were as an actor, there were some who did not always agree with your choices. And in fact, we came under a lot of fire from various organizations that were emerging at that time within the framework of the NAACP and the other less conservative organizations that were concerned with Black imagery on television. There was a lot of pressure all around. And Norman Lear conceded this as the producer and the director of our program, Good Times, as well as other television programs that became iconic programs in themselves.
Yeah.
He had a pretty good fix as to what was going on, the pressures we were under, but it wasn't until he and I formed a good relationship, and he had, in fact, fired me a couple of times. I was fired from Good Times only to be rehired later on another program that he was developing. And our relationship now spans better than some 50 or 60 years. Norman recently turned 101 years old.
Wow.
Damn.
Imagine that. So if you could really appreciate it when you say 101, that in itself is amazing.
Yeah.
But the fact he contributed to the development of television, the most powerful means of communication we have as human beings, I feel, for all the art forms, for music, for comedy, for drama, television was available to the average working man. And Norman Lear was able to reach the average human being and speak to them in a language that they understood, whether it be drama or comedy, sometimes wrapping them both in the same package. And you wouldn't realize that you'd been given a life lesson until the program was well over and you begin to talk about it. As people used to say in those days, over the water cooler at work, or whatever you did, whatever you were doing, you learned from watching television.
Oh my God, yeah.
That's part of his biggest contribution, just like really tackling, social issues of the time, like the whole dynamic just in Archie Bunker's house with him and Meathead and Edith and and the Jeffersons, all that, just everything he did. We watched so many different programs of his in that time because they all dealt with, like, they would take it head on, whether
the
it was
tough
Maude.
stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, they would go right into it, man.
Yeah.
And
he changed the face of television, literally.
He
In programs really had no learning substance. It might come through in a few cases every once in a while, like Omnibus or some of the other programs who are more for the elite or the intellectually stimulating. but Norman wrapped it in a package that the average consumer could appreciate and learn from. And I was
Absolutely.
very fortunate in having worked with him, and we remain friends until this very day. So I'll always be appreciative of the opportunities that he provided me with as a writer and as a performer to express myself and to not have to bite my tongue about what I knew were the realities of life, the average minority in those days. And he gave me that opportunity, which I'll always treasure and always be grateful for. Excuse me, go ahead.
No, please. I was just about to say, like, and I'm listening to what you're saying, and I appreciate all of it because you, as a kid, sitting in my grandparents' house on the floor watching their TV, it was interesting to be able to see into other worlds that you're not maybe necessarily neighbors with. And I felt I loved your family, I really genuinely did. And I felt that way about some other TV families that it was just different. And I realized different was okay at a young age because of that. And I really genuinely you're one of my favorite dads, if not I mean that. And I said that to Oteil right away when he told me you guys had talked. It's there was a strictness, but a vulnerability and a caring. It was really awesome. I just I thank you for everything that it was really great to see that. I like watching the parent child relationship and the dynamic.
Yeah.
And the key word that you used right then in describing your affection for the program was vulnerability. And I learned that from Carl Reiner. Carl Reiner, of course, was a staple on your show of shows, one of the most popular programs at that time. And they had a wonderful ensemble of comedian actors.
Mel Brooks.
Sid Caesar, Mel Brooks, some extremely creative people were all combining together to create your show of shows. With Imogene Coca, Carl Reiner, amongst others. And I learned from watching, those were my favorite shows in which the writers would perform as characters as well. So again, it was as I say, it was a learning experience to be able to see these guys work at their craft and to really embody the spirit and the essence of what they were doing as characters and the sketches that they had written. It was a wonderful time. You imagine working with people like Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, Imogene Coca on a regular basis, or just even occasionally.
Yeah,
it couldn't have. It was like getting a free PhD from Harvard.
Yeah,
that's amazing. One of my favorite things that I was able to tell my friends about meeting with you was that we always suspected, we felt like you were that dad, like that was you in real life. I know everybody universally felt that if I were to ask him. And then to actually meet you and you absolutely are 1,000% that guy, just especially after all this time, just made it even better. And that is something that you can't say about a lot of your heroes. I mean, you probably could say it about more of your heroes than I can of mine, but sometimes you don't want to meet your heroes. It could be a real letdown.
Yeah, sometimes it can destroy the illusion to meet them in reality. And other times it's refreshing and gratifying. So I was very fortunate in that I got to meet the man that was responsible for creating opportunities for all these wonderful talents, that being Norman Lear.
Yeah.
He changed the face of the most important communication device in the history of mankind, I feel. Television had no real relevance or wasn't seen as a learning tool to the degree that it obviously became until Norman took his rightful place as one of the creative forces behind all of television and changed the thinking of a populace.
Yeah.
Did future fathers on television, fathers, ever reach out to you for advice or for guidance or anything to that effect?
No, I can't say that they did. The fact that so many of them made it known to me that they enjoyed the program and they enjoyed what I was doing, but I can't recall any of them ever coming to me for actual advice and sitting down. Any advice that they glommed from me was just learned and came about as a result of the dialogues that we would have about the programming. And there were some who were, it wasn't universally accepted by every human being as being factual and being true to life. There were those who were opposed to it because they felt that the Evans family, seemingly trapped in poverty, did not represent the opportunities that were being presented to all of America. And yet they did obviously represent a very important demographic in that it showed a working class family living in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Bed-Stuy area of Brooklyn. And so it was a learning experience all the way around. If you really got to look at it good.
Yeah.
It was a learning experience for me. I'll forever be grateful for the opportunities that Good Times, the TV program, provided me with.
Well, I think it was it's one slice. Like you can't be everything to everybody. Like the Jeffersons showed a family going from lower middle class or middle class or whatever, and like the whole theme song, moving on up,
Right.
and then
Cosby Show was a doctor and a lawyer.
Yeah. Or even back then, like Archie Bunker didn't represent everything, but he represented that thing. He's trying to tell that story. Like I didn't need Archie Bunker to also be a rich Wall Street guy.
Well, and even Felix and Oscar, an Odd Couple, two divorced men sharing an apartment without driving each other crazy. Like what a phenomenal, yeah, it didn't have to be everything to everyone. You're right. But each show had that vulnerability. That was a really incredible era of television.
Yeah, it's so great to realize now. I've realized it now more talking to you, how Wild West it was, like, because it was just new. So it presented a lot of upward mobility that you think of these things as having such a high ceiling right now to try to get to the top. Whereas back then, if you were open and willing to do the work, you could be like in the game soon. That's amazing.
It was a great opportunity. And again, the timing could not have been better. It was the most propitious timing that one could hope for in terms of opportunities, in terms of the quality of television. The quality of television was such that we could reach for and aspire to anything we wanted to do in terms of TV. And the rest of it was whether they got a yay or a nay was really up to the sponsors primarily.
Yeah.
There were no limitations. So it was a wonderful time. And I'll forever be grateful for the timing that I that was presented to me. It couldn't have been any better.
Well, you really took the ball and just skyhooked them one after the other, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Like, Coming to America, all of them, man.
Yeah, we got to talk a little bit about Roots because Casey was telling me a story that I want to get to in a minute. But it was such a profound change. Like it had such huge ripples and waves throughout America. Not just Black America, and that had to be that. Tell us the story. Like, did you realize it was going to be that big, or what?
We knew it had the potential to be earth-shaking. Plus, of Alex Haley's book. The book was such a phenomenal global success. Roots.
Yeah.
That as actors, we begin to talk about the potential of it in terms of being a television program, even though at that time it had not been realized as such by the networks or those responsible for developing written material into TV programming. But we all knew that intuitively, and after reading whatever sections of the book were available to the public, and some of us were fortunate enough to know and to have access to the early, what would you say, the early segments of roots that were developed, to realize that this was something that was going to be earth-shaking. It was going to be different from anything else that had preceded it or followed. And it was. It held true, which brings me to a point of writing, which I believe it was the essence of television. Norman gave voice and gave platforms to emerging, developing writers at that time. And that's always been my favorite form of entertainment and creativity, is the writing, because you can start with blank paper and a pencil and literally create worlds.
Yeah.
It all starts with the written material. And I was a big fan of just about every genre you can imagine: science fiction, historical, the whole 9 yards. So when Roots came along, and I said, boy, whoever gets to perform in this program is going to have a career. And we all realized for the opportunities that it presented in terms of giving dramatic actors a platform on which to present their talents to a world at large. And to be in the capable hands of a Norman Lear, you couldn't ask for more, because he was a master at recognizing the power of the written word.
Yeah.
Being a writer himself and having had the life experiences that he had already had as a human being, he was able to convey that to his actors. And we, in turn, were able to convey that to the public at large.
Yeah. Now, when you first auditioned for Roots, that wasn't the part. It was a different part, right? Originally, that
Absolutely.
they had you read for.
Well, we had heard rumors that it was going to be, at that time, it was going to be a series. And so we tried to become as conversant with the material as possible. And the initial role that I was offered was that of a character that I did not get to portray. That was done by an actor by the name of Jitu Kumbuka, who portrayed the wrestler. And I liked the role of the wrestler, even though it was not a pivotal role. It showed a side of the slave demographic that was not your next door nice guy. He was a recalcitrant slave, and that he knew what freedom was, and he was not the most diplomatic person in the room in regards to reacquiring his freedom. So I liked that because it gave me a chance to show the physicality of and the mentality of those slaves who were not content to be slaves or couldn't accept that role of subservient easily or diplomatically. And it was a wonderful opportunity. G2 and I became very close friends prior to his departure from this planet. And we went horseback riding together. I remember taking him out. I was a big horseman in those days. I raised horses. I loved horses. And I was a pretty proficient horseback horseman.
Wow.
My wife, Casey's mom, was the inspirational force behind that, because she was a farm girl, having been raised in Iowa, and she always had horses. So I developed a love for horses as well, never knowing that one day I would be in a position to own a horse or two, in fact. But I became very proficient at horseback riding, particularly bareback. And I raised a couple of horses from young colts up to adulthood, to where they could be ridden by a fully grown human being.
Wow.
And I became a proficient horseback rider as a result of that. But I always rode bareback because I wanted to emulate my Native American ancestors to that degree. So I learned how, and I became very, very proficient at riding horseback bareback. And
wow.
I would take my horse up to the high desert in California for weekends at a time. And I just take him up there in a trailer, along with enough food and water for him, and food and water to sustain myself for a week or for several days at a time. And I'd ride at night primarily, because during the day it'd be well over 100 degrees or too hot to ride. So I'd let him rest during the day, and at night we would ride. And that Arabian, he was half Arab, and half Morgan. So the Morgan ancestry of his lineage gave him the size that was required to carry a full-grown adult, and the Arab blood gave him the stamina. He loved to run. And he loved to run at night. So we had a good companionship and a good relationship, and I was to keep him for several years. And finally, I sold him when he became an adult, and I moved from California.
Wow. Bareback at night. Amazing. Jeez.
I love it, man. I want to hear more about the family, you and a Midwestern farm girl and riding bareback, raising horses, and little Casey. Like that's it's the an America's Dad story. Like it's like that's the real thing.
Yes, it was. These were real life experiences that I was able to unfold in the character of James Evans as the character was further developed along the lines of what Norman envisioned. And as I said, the opportunities were there, and I took full advantage of them.
Now, as a writer and an actor, was it from the beginning of season 1 that you were involved in the writing as well, or did that come afterwards, or was that something how did you approach that?
The writing of and the development of James Evans, the character?
Yeah,
Well, I was very, very forward and very forceful in letting Norman and the rest of the writers know what I felt, what I knew were the true instincts and the true manifestations of James Evans's character as we developed different storylines. I was very clear and adamant about what I thought, what I knew were James's real reactions predicated on the fact that I was living the life.
Right.
Yeah.
Not imagining it as most of our writers were, who a lot of them had never even had a momentary dialogue with any person of color. So all they could do is work from a fantasy standpoint.
Yeah.
And it was predicated, of course, on reality. And it was when I would bring that opinion or that forceful attitude in regards to correct demonstration of what this character would do in different situations, that our differences would arise. Because as I said, in those days, I was not the most diplomatic in terms of conveying my differences.
Yeah. That's also, though, you're in a big role, and that's you, and that's you representing a massive responsibility. So, I mean, good for you, and damn right you should. I mean, that's not something where you let someone kind of fantasy write a role for you. I mean, you're living that role. Yeah, like I always think about that. You hear about some actors that they take the script as is and recite and don't really put much of themselves into it. I don't know how I don't think I'd be able to do that. I guess it depends on the role.
I remember you telling us that you told the writers, well, let's take it outside.
Yeah, I was not above at all presenting the alternative to peaceful dialogue in regards to differences about scripts in those days. My growing up in New Jersey gives you a basic let's take it outside.
Let's take it outside. That should be on the sign. Welcome to New Jersey. Let's take it outside.
What part of New Jersey are you from originally?
I was born in Newark and raised in East Orange, New Jersey, two cities in very close proximity to each other, but they couldn't have been more different in terms of opportunities and child raising. Newark, of course, was an industrial city with tremendous job opportunities of every possible description you can name. And East Orange was a bedroom community. Most of the people that lived there in those days would commute to New York City to work.
Right.
It was only 12 miles away. So you could hop on the train to Lackawanna and be in New York in literally a matter of moments, a totally different world.
I just drove by both of them this morning, coming back from Philly.
Now it takes 2 hours, right?
Yeah. The traffic is now. one of the things I wanted to ask you was, your love of, I grew up with sports and I also grew up with music and literature. And I wanted to ask you, was there a teacher or a relative or a mentor that got you interested in reading and writing at the earliest, age? Anybody in particular that um, you know, gave you the confidence in your writing and pushed that creative side?
I'd have to say that that role was fulfilled by a number of educators that I had along the way. And that was a good thing about East Orange. We had a very good educational system there, starting from grade school on up. So by the time I matriculated high school, I had pretty much received a first class education that would have been the equivalent of a couple of years in college at a
Wow.
educational system. So, yes, I was encouraged to and encouraged to read and develop my academic skills at East Orange because we had a very good educational system, and all the opportunities to learn to read and to develop an appreciation for the written word were there in East Orange at that time. And I felt I had a natural affinity for English and for storytelling. I enjoyed it, and I found it very gratifying to be exposed to and have access to all these wonderful writers and books. And that became my favorite pastime, writing and reading and books in particular of just about every form of literacy you can imagine. My favorite being science fiction because it allowed me to use my imagination and encourage the development of my imagination. Writers like Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury became commonplace to me. That was my regular reading material. So the Chronicles of Mars and all those good science fiction classics that were developed later by comparable writers, they were my regular reading material. And I enjoyed it immensely. And there's no doubt that it helped further my education.
Wow.
That's so great. My brother was so into the same writers, man, the sci-fi guys, and it just it's so great to hear that we're such kindred spirits in so many ways. I don't want to keep you all day, but I do want to ask you about living in Africa because when we talked, you mentioned a little bit about it, and I think I saw an interview with you somewhere, and you said something about hanging with the street people is like how you know if you've really like been accepted by the locals, and I was really struck by that. What was it that caused you to want, was it doing roots? What was it that made you want to go actually move over there?
I think it was the acceptance that I got and just a feeling of being a drop of salt water in a saltwater pool. I didn't feel like I was being singled out for anything exclusively or to the detraction of not being involved in other forms of life or society based on economics or anything else. I just felt very, very comfortable in Africa, and particularly when I could move there and be amongst the people and develop friendships from all walks of life, from all levels, economically as well as educationally in Africa, that my education really began to take a solid form. And I felt most comfortable moving from one segment of the populace to another segment based on economics, education, the whole 9 yards. I was always very comfortable in Liberia or whatever part of Africa I was in. And the exception being when I was in South Africa. And at that time, it was under such rigid apartheid laws that it was virtually impossible for me to become as comfortable as I would later on when they became more enlightened there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Did it start off with like just a visit to Africa initially? Did it initially start off with just a visit to Africa, or was this something you planned before you ever went the first time?
Yeah, it was. It was something that relationship with Africa emerged with each subsequent visit, and the longer I would stay each time, the more I developed a love and appreciation for it, as well as I became more critical in those areas that it needed criticizing in.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was educational, and it was antithetical to what I'd been taught in the school books and some of the less enlightened conversations that I'd had with various other people who had gone to Africa or had developed relationships with African friends. And of course, it was contingent to some degree, to a large degree, in fact, upon which part of Africa they'd received their education in. If they were from South Africa and they had been subjected to all that South African propaganda that was prevalent at the time, then of course they felt one way about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, thank you so much for hanging out with us. What an incredible honor to have you on the podcast. Oh, you got something there. What does it say?
Well, my son just brought me a note to remind me to add this and certainly make this part of my observations while I lived in Liberia or brought back. What it was a helmet.
Yes, that's right. Tell us about that.
I brought back a ceremonial hand-carved wooden helmet made from one piece of wood from the tree trunk of a particular tree, and it was carved in such a way that when you put it on, your vision was totally focused to look through the helmet into what appeared to be a cinemascopic lens at that time. To this day, my son has the helmet. He kept it all these years. And I tell you, when I put it on, the most miraculous thing happened. It became like a communication device. We being my wife at the time, Casey's mom, and I always had livestock around, horses, chickens, and I put that helmet on, and I will swear to this day that when I put it on and I could focus on an animal, I could almost call that animal without saying a word, just focus my vision on the animal, looking through that helmet. And I came to find out later that's what it was. It was a communication device. You put that helmet on, and you could communicate with the animals and with other human beings if they were receptive.
Yeah.
So it was a magical helmet. And to this day, we still have it, as I said.
Wow. That's really incredible.
That's awesome, because I did want to ask you before you went if you ever had some kind of crazy, anomalous Star Trek mystical experience, and boom, there you go.
There it was. Exactly.
I got to get you to tell one more super quick story.
Well, I have a question too before we depart. Yeah.
But you got to tell him the story of the guy who pulled you over on the highway after he saw Roots. It pulled you over on the highway in California.
Yeah. So Roots airs, and I'm driving to work one morning, and I'm on the, I believe it was the San Diego freeway, and driver in the lane next to me indicated he wanted me to pull over, but it wasn't just any driver. He was an enormous man. I would say he weighed well in excess of 300 pounds. In fact, so he was so big, his car was leaning to one side. I didn't know what his reaction was going to be, whether he'd enjoyed the program or whether he was upset or not.
Oh, yeah.
And his actions to get me to pull over. So I did reluctantly and with some degree of apprehension. I'll admit it to this day, because like I said, he was a big guy and his car was not in the best condition. And it was, in fact, like I said, it was leaning to one side. He was such a big guy, well in excess of 300. And he climbed out of his car, he approached my vehicle, and I could see he was still upset. He was agitated about something. I had no idea what it was, and I wasn't about to ask him. what was the problem. So I just sat there quietly and timidly and tried to get as small as I possibly could, so I wouldn't look like I was intimidating or a confrontation. And he said, "Hey man, I just want to tell you something." I said, "Yes, sir. What would that be?" So well, I watched that program Roots last night, and I didn't know what was going to come in, whether he liked it or not. And he said, and I got so God bless it up, and his profanity was a lot more liberal than mine. As I read the story, and he said, I got so upset. I went upstairs, got my pistol in there, shot the blood goddamn TV. Shot. So I said, damn, if he killed the TV, what's he gonna do to me? Oh, I was ready to leave at that moment. And I said, I'm sorry you didn't like it. He said, no, I love some parts of it, but that got me upset. Like I said, I shot the TV. And he meant it. He had pulled his pistol and blew the TV up. And I wonder if this guy's looking for me to compensate him for the loss of his television or what it is. One way.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry about that, sir. I hope next time you find something more to your liking. I drove off and I left him there as he reflected on the damage that he'd done to his own personal television. To me, as my fault,
My God.
So I like to, and how it affects some people.
That's a whole other definition of road rage there, huh?
See, I like to think that he was on your side. And he was so upset by what he saw done to you that he shot his TV, because I know we wanted to shoot the TV too.
Wow. And to see you the next day on the highway. What a wild moment.
That must have been a trip.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'd love to ask you one more quick question if we have time.
Sure.
We've had the privilege of speaking to some other elite athletes, Bill Walton, Ricky Williams, we just recently had on. And it always comes up about, the importance of having a good coach. And you coming up, playing football, reaching a level of professionally, clearly a fantastic athlete as well. Is there anything that you took from your upbringing as an athlete that to this day has stayed true as like a life lesson that helped you through the other careers and the other, endeavors that you took part in?
I'd have to say most definitely. And that coach, as you indicated, would be a monumental driving force in my life and gave me life lessons. That coach was no less than the late Hank Stram. Even when he released me the second time, he was still fair with me, treated me like I was a first-round draft choice, even though I was a free agent and had no chance, really had very little chance of making it on the club, that is the Kansas City Chiefs back in those days, prior to him going to the Super Bowl. I mean, the talent level was so high. They had the biggest people in football, the most aggressive, the finest athletes that had ever walked the planet. People like Buck Buchanan and others, Mike Garrett, Heisman Trophy winners, Lenny Dawson.
Lenny Dawson.
I learned and was proud to say that for a few weeks of my life, I was a Kansas City Chief. And prior to them going to the Super Bowl and then rejoined them after they played in the Super Bowl, 2 years later, I tried again, not to be successful either time, but it did give me a chance to be exposed to and to share a locker room with and to share practices with some of the finest athletes that had ever played the game. Receivers like Otis Taylor and defensive linemen like Willie Lanier, guys who would go to the Hall of Fame. To say that I shared a locker room with them and that for a brief period of my life, I was a Kansas City Chief. It'll always give me a feeling of pride, which is why my son is named KC Amos. As opposed to if I'd tried out for the Bills, he would have been BB Amos.
Lucky him. Lucky him. You weren't a Miami Dolphin, huh?
It worked out all right. He's had no reluctance to let people know his name is KC, although he doesn't go about telling them what the origin of the name was. I'm quick to do that.
Yeah.
At any rate, it was a wonderful experience for me in the final analysis.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I feel like the folks that have the great coaches that are honest with them and treat them real and, fair go very far. I feel bad sometimes for folks that didn't have a good coach somewhere along, whether it's little league, whether it's pro, college, high school, whatever it may be. Coaches have a huge responsibility, and it's really great to hear that, it was such a legendary coach like Stram that did that for you. Must have been incredible. What an amazing journey you've had.
Yeah, you've had like 4 different really cool lives. It's great.
And all of them have been good. In the final analysis, they've all been great and very gratifying, beneficial.
And you're smiling and happy and hanging out with me and my crazy band till 2:30 in the morning. I got to just tell people how gracious you were. I am with a lot of famous people, and sometimes I don't have time to take pictures and really give everybody all the time that they want from you, but you took a picture with every band member's guest, the local crew. Like you didn't, and we could tell you weren't like in a rush or what. You're just so gracious to everyone. So thank you for that. And I'm glad for people to get to, our fans to get to see you are that guy that's on television.
Well, Teal, I thank you for that, but I want to reciprocate by saying your band members and all those that were with your band that night, it was a way of me getting to know them. As I told you, my son had introduced me to the Grateful Dead, of which you were obviously a stalwart member for so many years and had so much influence. It took him years to convince me to go to a show with him, my very first Grateful Dead concert. And when I did finally acquiesce, coming from the conservative world of jazz and etc., and the music that's offered to me that I grew up with, and there were some luminaries, some earth-shaking musicians that I was exposed to at that time, but nothing had had the impact, including my career with Noel Pointer and others, that seeing the Grateful Dead and you perform with them had on me at that time. When I finally did go to the Grateful Dead show, I was hooked. And after that, I became probably one of their biggest fans. Kept it on a QT for a while because I wasn't sure how popular my relationship with the Grateful Dead would have been. But nevertheless, I enjoyed it, and it was wonderful. And we become good friends, and I'm a lifelong fan since. And I try never to miss a show when it's logistically feasible for me to make it. I go there live, and I stay for both shows, or even for repeated performances.
Do you have a favorite Grateful Dead song?
I've got quite a few of them, but I think "Fire on the Mountain" is one of my favorites.
That's my wife's favorite too.
I love the writing. I love the music. But what I love is the quality of the musicianship. That's the thing. It isn't just a fad or a type of music that comes and goes and is out of fashion next week. It'll be with us from now on. It's changed the musical world. And it's changed my appreciation of the musical artistry that most of the band members possess. I mean, these are some of the finest musicians I've ever had the privilege of hearing, much less to say, well, I know this one, I know that one, and we're friends. So it gives me appreciation on another level altogether to say that I know these people, and they are great people. They're great human beings, but fantastic musicians. So the aggregation, when they come together, is always gratifying to me. But "Fire on the Mountain" would be my favorite.
Nice. I love it.
Beautiful.
Well, I hope we all get to hang out together. What I want to do is meet you at the comedy club in New York when Mike's doing comedy because, you know, he used to hang out with Paul Mooney and stuff back in the day. So he's got the real comedy bug. Yeah.
Heck yeah.
We got to go do that because Mike is super funny, man. We'll have a great time. And he's as much of a music head. I mean, we definitely have these three things in common between comedy
and I'll bring a picture of my great-grandfather with Ernest Borgnine to show you.
Yeah.
Absolutely, no doubt. And I'll bring my memories, so we'll share. We will get
deal. It's a deal.
I thank you enough. I can't thank you enough, rather, for the opportunities I've had to share with you our common experiences in music, comedy, and the fans, or rather the icons that we've come to know as fans that we've all established over the years in our respective careers. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, man. You have a great day. We really appreciate you giving us so much time.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure and an honor.
I thank you guys for the opportunity, and I wish you nothing but the best as the years come.
You too.
Thank you, sir.
Bless you, brother. Man, that was great. Oh, that was perfect.
Thank you so much.
Too much.
Casey, thank you so much.
Yeah, dude.
And that could have been a real disaster if he got drafted by anyone else. You could have been, been Amos the Viking. You could have been
Viking. I love it.
It could have been Amos. Yeah. New York Amos, NY. Oh, thank God you're Casey.
No doubt.
Casey is such a hip name. It's the best.
Yeah, I love that name.
That's better than George Foreman naming all 5 kids George Foreman.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you guys so much.
You guys have a great day, man.
You too. We'll see you at the next show.
Absolutely. I'll be back up there soon. And
Pleasure
Jamaica.
to meet you both.
I'm looking to collaborate with you at some point in our respective future.
Hey, man, I will come to Jamaica in a second. I don't know when y'all are going to get the timeline for y'all getting moved in over there, but you just let me know.
Absolutely.
All right, buddy.
I want to collaborate big time.
That goes both ways, bro. God bless you and keep on keeping on.
You too, man. We'll see you guys next time.
All right now. God bless. Straight ahead.
We're going to stick around and record our intros now. So thank you.
Yeah. Bless y'all. Casey, I'll be talking to you soon too, brother.
All right, Big O. Talk to you soon, bro.
Love you.